Hello and welcome to the Horticulturalists. I'm Stephen Ryan.
And I'm Matthew Lucas.
And we post a video every week, so don't forget to hit subscribe and the alert button to remind you of our next video.
Yes, do indeed. And every Monday we do a short where Stephen Ryan answers your burning horticultural questions. So if you've got a question, put it in the comments below and do say where you're from in the world. It helps Stephen answer the question.
Yes,
and we will answer it in a Monday short.
Yes, so do that.
Do.
So, where are we today?
Well,
one
Stephen,
might ask.
We're in an open area full of deliciousness. What's going on?
All right, well, we're at a nursery in an area called King Lake, which is sort of northeast of Melbourne, and it's called Antique Perennials. And we're going to have a look today at some of the remarkable ornamental grasses that Matt and Mike have collected and are selling here from the nursery.
Wonderful. And we're also going to meet Matt, one of the owners, to talk a little bit about the grass collection, but also other details about propagation and care and this wonderful nursery. Now, we will put the details of the nursery below. You can find out all the opening times. It is open to the public, and they do sell, to most nurseries across Australia. So every quarantine state Antique Perennials ships to, so you should be able to find their
plant material. But remember, they don't mail order out personal stock, so you can't get them to send it directly to you.
No, only through nurseries, and they don't have an e-com platform, and all Australian growers cannot send live material or seeds out of the country.
No,
alas,
exactly.
For our American and European viewers, but nonetheless, you're going to see so much beauty today.
Of course, and many of these plants are probably available from local suppliers anyway.
They would be. I mean, it's fair to say grass is kind of having its moment in the sun as a decorative perennial plant. I mean, the whole Piet, Uldolf, Prairie thing, grass is everywhere, Stephen.
Yeah, they have come into their own again, and I think people are more appreciative of the subtle beauties of grasses. Having said that, though, one or two of them aren't exactly what I would call subtle either. They're very in-your-face type plants. So there's so much diversity. Dare I say you could fill a garden up with just grass?
Okay, there's a challenge. I'm sure there is one. And, you know, we've all moved on from the pampas grass, which was the only choice in the 70s.
It was rather.
Well, I think without further ado, we should go and have a look at the grass collection and talk to Matt.
Yes, what a great idea.
All right, Stephen, before we go and meet Matt, the owner, I need to brush up on my grasses 101.
Yeah.
Tell us everything there is to know about grass, Stephen.
Oh, God, how long have we got? All right, well, grasses as ornamental plants, I mean, I'm not talking about what you turn into lawns. There's a huge array to select from, and they come from all over the world. So in this garden alone, we've got grasses that come from New Zealand, we've got Australian native grasses, we've got prairie grasses from North America, we've got European grasses. We're walking past one right now. So there's a whole range of grasses all over the world. And it's really then a matter of selecting those that have characteristics that are useful for the garden. Working out whether you need an evergreen or a herbaceous grass, heights and shapes and forms, whether you want ones that spill over. I mean, there's so many things to take into consideration. And of course, there's also how they stand up and how long they flower for. All those considerations need to be taken into account before you make your final selection, I think.
Yeah. And I mean, naive of me, but I just always assume grass looks quite delicate and feathery, that it's going to need moisture, that there aren't any really dry loving grasses, but that's not the case.
No, there's plenty that are really dry loving, but as Matt will explain, I am sure that there are lots of grasses you've got to be careful of as well. So you don't necessarily want to introduce something to your garden that could end up not only taking over your garden, but maybe
the world.
But getting out into the forests as well. So you have to be very careful about what you select and make sure that it isn't going to be the next environmental weed as well.
Yeah, I guess too, here in Australia, we have very strict quarantine rules and regulations. So it's very difficult to bring grass species into this country.
Yes, it is. It's got to a point where I wouldn't even attempt to bring any new grasses in through official channels because it's slow. You probably have to have them virus indexed. They'd have to be assessed for a lot longer than your average tree or shrub would. And so ornamental grasses, I think we have to be happy with what we've got in this country, and hopefully people like Matt and others will develop new cultivars and things from some of these that we can enjoy anyway.
Well, actually, just behind us is the grass rack.
Yes.
So let's go and find Matt and just find out a bit more about his amazing grass collection.
All right, let's. Well, everybody, I'd like to introduce the co-owner of Antique Perennials, and that's Matt Reed. And we've caught up with each other in lots of different places over the years, but not here, funnily enough.
There you go, Matt. Great to meet you. Thanks for having us.
You too, Matt.
Now, Matt, the story's all about grasses today, so we want to know everything there is to know about ornamental grasses.
And you've got 2 seconds.
Yeah, exactly, yes. We need it in a hurry. The display garden here is looking stunning, and we're sort of in high summer. Most of the grasses are looking absolutely fabulous.
Peak time.
So we've hit it just at the right moment to do a story on them, and I'm going to throw this at you. What's your favourite?
Yeah, it's a good question. My favourite short grass would have to be Andropogon. There's quite a few different forms out. Prairie Blues is my favourite.
Yeah.
It's really well behaved, super tough. It's a North American prairie grass. Great colour, changes in autumn to really good fiery yellows and
So
reds.
it's one of the herbaceous grasses.
Yes, one of the herbaceous ones. Well, my tall favourite one, which is the one behind us, you can see.
Ah, yes.
It's been grown in the country for a long, long time. But
Yeah.
Stipa gigantea.
Yeah, you do realise that's had a name change, don't you?
I know we're not going to mention that. I've still got a thousand.
I will at
I've
some
got a
point.
thousand labels I've got to get rid of.
Yeah,
before we...
that always happens, doesn't it?
know.
You know, you get a label batch done and then somebody tells you the name's changed.
Yeah,
damn it.
constantly. Yeah.
But yeah, the gigantea is a fabulous grass
Yeah.
because it's got real presence in a garden.
And it starts flowering early,
Yeah.
holds flowers late.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
brilliant.
longevity.
Yes.
Now, you alluded to something just then about not being sort of rampant. So that's, I think,
Yes.
the obvious thing to me, who knows nothing about grasses, is that the grasses you see, you know, out in the wilds and in their natural habitat are very good at self-seeding and propagating themselves.
Yeah, that's.
Obviously, that's not the case here, but talk us through that a little bit in terms
It
of
is
these.
our most common question we get asked
Yeah,
about
I bet it
grasses.
is. Yeah.
And I just point to the King Lake National Park right there.
Yeah.
We get inspected every year.
Yeah.
We're accredited a nursery. We don't grow any grasses we feel are a problem.
Mm,
So there are quite a few which are available in nurseries we will not grow.
So
right.
So
you assess the
Absolutely.
weediness of any of your grasses.
yes, most grasses spend at least 2 years in my home garden, which is just around the corner,
Yeah.
in lots of different environments. And if it doesn't seed in the garden, then I'm happy to grow it in the nursery.
Yeah.
You've also got to be careful because we send our plants Australia wide.
Mm,
Some, this goes for all plants, some plants which aren't weeds here may be weeds, say in Sydney, like Penniseed and red buttons. Wonderful plant here.
Yeah.
In Sydney, I wouldn't grow it because the winter's too warm, the seedlings will overwinter and carry on.
So that.
Yeah.
That's
So
the thing.
is that one of the deciding factors then in terms of choosing a grass in your climate? Is that how the winter treats the seeds and the seedlings?
A lot, yes.
Right.
Yes.
So would it be better to say then, wild card statement, to choose a grass that is not from your climatic zone, if you can, and
Yes.
it's less likely to then be weedy?
Often is.
Mm.
Yeah, often.
Yeah, because if something can survive without any manipulation or watering or whatever, I guess that's the one that could,
Yeah.
in fact, take off.
Yeah.
But it does raise the issue with the Stipa gigantea.
Yes.
Comes from a climate not dissimilar
Correct.
to ours, and yet I've never seen it go weedy.
No, funnily enough, we've probably had 3 seedlings here in 5 years.
Wow.
And they only seed in the gravel.
Yeah, so
They won't seed in the mulch. And Stipa and some of the others basically are the same thing. Yet there's a garden in Dixon's Creek, which is 400 metres less elevation, 10 minutes away. And she's had about 200 come up again in the gravel garden, and she's panicked.
Oh, right.
And I've said to her, look, 25 years, I've never ever heard of that. It's just a very unique microclimate. Also, we think there's actually not the right insect to actually pollinate things like Stipa gigantea.
Yeah.
Ah.
So it may be something like that, because I always think of grasses mainly as being wind pollinated, so I don't sort of think about them that way.
This is apparently a little European wasp.
Oh, really? Oh, well, there you
Because
go.
it's covered in seed heads, you'd think,
Yes.
why is this not more successful?
I
Oh, well,
know.
it's just in the wrong.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't
Yeah.
have what it wants.
And it's the same for things like Panicums, Chionochloa, which is this one, New Zealand
Yeah.
grass
Yeah.
right here.
Favourite of Mr. Ryan's.
Yeah, I
I
love
collect the
Chionochloa.
seed off that, and I can't get it to germinate. It rarely ever comes.
Oh.
You might get 20 out
I
of
should send you a
2,000.
tray of seedlings.
Yeah, it's bizarre.
So then, on that point, do you propagate largely by division here
We
for the
do.
grasses?
Virtually all Stipa gigantea we do from seed, but we have to buy the seed from overseas because these plants will not set seed.
That is hilarious.
No.
Well, it's not. But another question, so my mind's going crazy here. So in terms of new species and new plants to try, are you importing seed? And grass is quite difficult in terms of an importation to Australia.
Very.
Where do you
There's a
stand on
very small list of seed grass seeds you're allowed to import in Australia. And
So
we-
obviously the Stipa is one of them.
yeah,
but-
yeah, and we do buy our seeds from a registered proper seed producer in Europe. We get health certificates. That's all inspected. It's all go through quarantine.
Yeah.
It's all checked properly.
Yeah.
Most of the other varieties we grow from division, things like Calamagrostis, Karl Foerster,
Yeah.
Yeah.
which is our boundary hedge, #1 selling grass in the world. It's sterile and doesn't run.
Yeah.
Super long flowering.
What more could you want in life?
It's a brilliant grass.
Sterile and not running.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it certainly
Yeah.
works from the point of view of a grass, and I do love the verticality of
Yes.
Karl Foerster. I think it's a
And,
fabulous
and it
grass.
still moves.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and that's the thing with grasses, isn't it? Is the sense of movement in a garden, because most other perennials and shrubs certainly are quite static,
Yes.
and grasses aren't. They move. Now, I've got another question. I've got a plant in my hand here, and I believe you've told me that this is one of your own selections. So you're also hopefully doing a little bit of
We do.
antique perennials selecting.
And
grasses.
look what we've got prepared earlier, another 2.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, we do collect a lot of our own seeds of
Yeah.
lots of perennials, and we put them in trial gardens. We grow them for 2 or 3 years. We pull out all the ones we're not happy with.
Yeah.
There's 3 varieties that we had, probably out of 300 seedlings. So 297 of them didn't make the cut.
In the compost bin.
Yep, 3 did.
Yeah.
Brilliant. And so that one is called,
That's Panicum virgatum Iron Maiden, which I love because it's got that wonderful burgundy
yeah,
fruit.
Yep.
and we'll
which is
show
beautiful.
you that growing in the garden. It's
Yep.
amazing. This one is Panicum blue steel
And that's also got wonderful verticality, I
Yes.
have to say.
and Panicum
Anvil.
virgatum anvil.
Yes.
So there you go. So they're 3 antique perennial selections.
Yes.
Not available anywhere other than Australia.
Funnily enough, Iron Maiden and Blue Steel have been sent to the UK.
Oh.
so they have got out of the country.
They have. Yeah.
Ah,
Lucky them.
Yeah.
And-
Lucky you.
And for those who love heavy metal, Iron Maiden and Anvil, of course, are named after bands. and
yeah, we sort of figured that.
There our tastes
and
diverge.
Blue
Matt.
Steel is our homage to Zoolander.
Well, they every cultural touch point.
There you
Yeah,
go.
oh goodness me.
So talking of which then, so we've got viewers in North America, in Europe, all around the world, different climates, blah, blah, blah. It's hard to generalize, but what are some things people should consider if they're choosing grasses for their garden?
One, they don't seed.
Yep.
Secondly, they don't collapse. Some varieties, like
Yeah.
perhaps the original Panicum virgatum,
Mm,
wonderful plant, but if you get rain and wind,
Yeah, it just falls over.
they'll fall over.
right.
There is a way of getting around that by doing what they call the Chelsea chop.
Yeah.
We actually do it with a lot of our Miscanthus too. So Miscanthus don't collapse, but we find they can get a bit big.
Yeah.
So normally a couple of weeks before Christmas, I go along and cut any grasses that can do that. And I cut them down by about half.
No, Southern Hemisphere Christmas, midsummer.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's right. Midsummer, yes.
Yeah. And it doesn't affect the flowering because you cut them all back before they form their buds.
Right,
So they'll just flower a little bit shorter, but they'll be a lot more bolt upright.
right.
And it works a treat.
But climatically, true to say, there's kind of a grass for everyone,
Oh, absolutely.
from arid to
Yes.
tundra.
Yes, yes. And look, there's some great, poas. There's some great poas in Australia. But
Yeah,
there's
we've got
also
some lovely native grasses, haven't we?
Absolutely, yeah. You know, sug and buggen. There's, we've got 4 or 5 new species ones we're trialling, plus some of the overseas poas like alpina. It's a great little grass and handles -20 to 40 plus. It's
Wow.
extraordinarily tough.
Yeah. Now, we've got some grasses here in your display garden that are evergreen grasses.
Yes.
And we've got any number of herbaceous perennial grasses. How do you manage those grasses come autumn, winter?
Yeah, great question. We leave all the grasses. This entire garden is actually left until about mid-August, so late winter.
Mm-hmm.
As you start to see the grasses and all the perennials bubble away at ground level, the crowns start to move, then we come in, we chop the whole lot down in one go.
Yeah.
We leave the grasses as long as possible because they do provide really good winter structure and colour and seed heads. It's left to the latest possible moment.
And you do it with both the evergreen and the
No, we
herbaceous
don't.
grasses?
Herbaceous grasses we cut down to very low to ground level.
Yeah.
Things like Chionochloa, Stipa, gigantea, Anemanthele, lessoniana, the New
Yeah.
Zealand grass. We just clean them up. We remove the old flower stems.
Ah,
And just give it a.
So you'd almost just rake through
You
it.
do rake
Yeah,
through it.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
that makes logical sense because I hate seeing these evergreen grasses
Yes.
given a sort of a number 2 haircut.
Yeah.
It just looks awful.
Yeah, well, look, Stipa is another classic one. If you cut that down in winter and it's evergreen, it'll just sulk and rot and,
Well, there you
and
go.
carry on for months. So,
Interesting. And I guess last thing is, grass is really big right now, isn't it?
I think they
It's a
have been big
trend.
for a long time, but it's now landscapers are starting to realise how useful they are for getting a volume in a garden quite quickly.
Yeah. So you can create height in a season if you've got
you can in one
a
season.
new garden.
And the amount of Karl Foersters we sell, because as you see, we've got it as a screening plant.
Yeah.
I hate hedges. I hate torturing plants, but trimming them into squares.
Yeah.
So I wanted a screening hedge.
So the formal French garden isn't your
No.
thing.
Or a bonsai collection.
Yeah. So to have that moving in the wind, but still doing its job is brilliant.
Yeah.
What a great idea. Grass is a hedge, Matt.
Yeah.
Let's
right.
make this
Screen maybe more than hedge.
Okay,
Yeah.
we'll make this a
Use
movement.
the right terminology.
Well, thanks for your grassy time today.
Yes, thank you, Matt.
No worries.
So Stephen, one of the things Matt mentions, grass is a hedge.
Yes. Well, more a screen than a hedge, but yes, I haven't seen this grass used in this way, I have
No.
to say, anywhere. And it's fabulous because they've used this Calamagrostis Karl Foerster
Yeah.
as a screen virtually right round the display garden.
Yeah.
It gets up tall enough to cut your view to the outside world to an extent without taking your eye away from the forest that's way over there.
Yeah.
And it's not static like a hedge is.
No.
Hedges tend to be really solid sort of things that block your view completely and they feel enclosing, whereas you feel like you could easily just waft your way through.
So, a really unusual use of grass planted en masse. So where is this form from and care? How do people look after it?
All right, well, Karl Foerster is a hybrid, so it's a man-made hybrid that was developed, I think, in Germany, and it's sterile, it's clump forming, and its biggest claim to fame, of course, is its enormous verticality,
Yeah.
and it holds that structure well into the winter. So come spring or late winter, you cut everything down and start it all off again, but you've got something there screening around the garden almost all year round.
Yeah.
So it's a fabulous grass.
Now, Matt did sort of mention care, but when would you cut this and how would you, how far would you go? What would you do to maintain it?
All right, well, as soon as you start seeing a little bit of growth starting to come in the late winter, early spring, you'll see some new shoots coming up from the bottom, because all of this greenery we're looking at the moment will all be brownery.
Right.
And so as soon as you see a little bit of growth starting to come from the bottom, certainly on a large scale like this, you'd go through with a strimmer or a brush cutter and just cut it all off at ground level, take all the clobber out, and away it will go again.
So this is a herbaceous perennial
Oh
grass.
yes, it's a proper herbaceous perennial grass. It has no threateningness about it at all. I mean, it's a sterile hybrid. It's a fantastic thing to have in a garden, and it will give you that vertical height in a border without sort of flopping over everything around it.
Yeah. Now, I'm presuming this isn't watered here by the looks of it.
Well, you wouldn't have to in the climate here. I find that if I don't water just a little bit during the summer with my Calamagrostis, our soil becomes virtually powdery by late summer most years. I do have to irrigate it a bit, but like many grasses, it'll show you it needs a good drink because the leaves will start to look a little mean. They'll start to roll and you can tell that it needs a drink. So I don't go out of my way to water on a regular basis, but if I can tell that it's looking a little stressed, I'll get in there and give it a drink.
Good
Yes,
for you,
there-
Stephen.
there you go.
Well, I'm loving, and so I guess back to your point about cutting it down. So obviously then you're going to have maybe a month. If you're using it as a screen, you're going to have a month where you don't have a screen.
Well, exactly. So it is a bit up and down about things, unlike a solid hedge.
Yeah.
But I think the dynamic movement of something like that is also part of its charm.
Yeah, and the movement in the wind, you're right, it is so beautiful. All right, well, let's look at more of Matt's amazing grasses.
Yes. Well, Matthew, we're down at ground level now. Yes, and we're in one of the embraces of one of the softest and airiest of grasses. And it used to, for a long time, be known as Stipa arundinacea. It's now Anemanthele lessoniana. And it's a New Zealand native grass. It's an evergreen grass, although I have to say it always has a slightly bronzy, coppery colour about it.
I kind of like that, though.
I do. I think it adds to the beauty of the plant. Has these amazing light, airy flower heads.
They are so
And
beautiful.
they move in just the slightest puff of air, and it rarely grows above about 1 metre or so tall, but an individual plant can easily get 1.5 metres to 2 metres across. And it's a beautiful grass, does need some moisture in the summer, being a New Zealand native grass. It's not necessarily used to Australian drought conditions. Although I do have to say in my own garden, I do get a little bit of self-seeding of it, but it's comparatively easy to manage, and I don't think it's going to waft outside my garden in a hurry.
Yeah.
So it comes up a little bit in the gravel edges of some of my paths, and in some cases I leave it there anyway because it looks stunning.
Beautiful. Now, Matt did talk about care. So with an evergreen grass, what should you be doing seasonally for?
All right. Well, when the flower heads start to collapse, which it will do in due course, I do what I call rake through the plant. I don't try and cut it right down. As an evergreen grass, it looks awful if you do that. And also, if you clean out the dead clobber out of the middle of it, then the plant looks fine straight away. So you can do it by hand. I mean, these flower heads will come loose quite easily once they're finished. And then you sort of get your hands in and underneath. But you can also do it with a metal rake. And just pull the rake gently through the grass and you'll pull out all of the undesirable dead material. So there you go.
Undesirable dead material. And just looking at these too, so many grasses would make great cut flowers. I mean, cut stems.
Yeah. Well, no reason why not. I mean, this is so fine and airy though. If you used it in a floral arrangement, you'd need to use quite a bit of it to have any sort of real impact, I would have thought.
Now, should you, in a garden like this, using grasses decoratively, should you be feeding them?
I wouldn't overfeed grasses because what tends to happen if your soil's too rich or too nutrient rich, then what happens is they often grow taller, laxer and fall apart. So you're better actually to treat most of your grasses a little bit mean. And if you do that, they stay compact. They tend to then flourish quite well. They don't need a lot of fertilizer. And in fact, if you've got the sort of garden where you can cut them down or clean out all the dead clobber and throw it back around as mulch around your plants, then as that rots down, that will put nutrients back again. So you're not actually taking anything away. So if you can do that, that's fine. A little bit of compost maybe, but you certainly wouldn't use a lot of strong manures and fertilizers on ornamental grasses. They don't need it and they'll actually gobble it up and lose some of their character.
And talking of character then, just looking at this garden and just thinking about grasses, obviously you've got some that are incredibly tall, some that are incredibly short, some that are vertical, some that are round. So there's a grass for everything you need in terms of getting scale and proportion in your garden.
There is, and I guess the only thing with grasses is that there's not a diverse or a huge diversity in flower colour. So, you know, you have coppery ones and creamy ones and bronzy ones and what have you, and most of them are green when the flower heads first start to come out. But, you know, there's not a huge diversity in flower colour. But that's about the only thing grasses probably don't, in fact, give you. But if you're using them as a counterpoint in a perennial border where there's already oodles of things probably with brightly coloured flowers, then the sort of slightly neutral tones that grasses tend to have are often a really good way of balancing things or separating colours that you don't necessarily want screaming at each other. So there's lots of ways of using your grasses, I have to say.
Well, we should go and find more grasses to have a look at.
Maybe some that I can stand up in front of as well.
Now, I know that size matters, Stephen.
Yes, it does. It certainly does. And I feel like I've just escaped from the jungle. And this time I don't have to sit down to talk about the particular plant. So in this case, we've got one of the Miscanthus grasses, which are basically all Asian. And this is a form of Miscanthus sinensis, which is still comparatively unheard of here in Australia. It's a cultivar called Cabaret. And apart from the fact that it grows beautifully tall, it has a very clean-lined, attractive variegation, I think. I think it has great potential if people are looking for something tall to hide their nefarious ways from the neighbours. This would be absolutely perfect. So there you go.
Also, it's, I mean, this is, so just explain to people where this is growing, because I'll drop in that shot and you can just see what a massive and very elegant form it is.
Oh yes, well this is actually not in the display garden but in one of the stock bed gardens just outside the display garden, and so this is propagating stock that Matt and Mike will use to grow plants in pots that I'll walk out with.
So what would happen to this plant is it gets dug up and divided in autumn, I presume. No, when?
No, late winter, you deal with your grasses as they're starting to move again.
Ah, right.
So same with your bamboos. I mean, they're all grasses anyway. The best time to divide nearly all of those plants is just as they're about to start moving in the spring, because the soil will start to warm up. The plant will start growing quickly, so it'll send out root system fast. So you're not going to have something sitting there being a poor little divided piece all winter long before it actually starts to move.
Good point. Good to know.
So there you go.
Well, this is amazing. I must say too, it's got a bit of a sugarcane tropical vibe.
Well, it has. That's why I felt like I was just coming out of the jungle.
Yeah.
I feel like I might have been a lost soldier or something who's just found his way out.
Because if you're wanting, and we've made a video about tropical look gardens in a cold climate, the Lost Nancy Mitford novel we're all looking for. But something like this as well would add a touch of the tropics to a cold garden where you wanted that vibe.
Yeah, so I think Miscanthus grasses are worldwide famous, and there's a lot of different cultivars out there. We're fortunate that we have a number of them here in Australia. We probably won't get any more in now, but that doesn't mean there won't be growers here that will take up the gauntlet and produce some Australian raised varieties in due course.
Hurrah!
Yes, so there you go.
So we're giving our best blue steel.
we're standing amongst some blue steel. So this is apparently one of Antique Perennials' own selections, and it's one of the Panicum grasses.
Yeah.
And they're fabulous ornamental herbaceous grasses. And this one, blue steel, has wonderful verticality.
Yeah.
It's just about starting to flower now, so you can see the flower heads just starting to form in the top. So they'll fluff out quite nicely. In fact, there's one or two just starting to fluff out now.
Yes.
So you can see that the whole thing will have this very vertical, upright form, and then the flowers will go poof at the top.
Right.
So you'll have this really quite beautiful textural quality about it. The colour is gorgeous. It's a really lovely silvery blue.
Yeah.
And I think this could have a home in nearly anybody's garden. It's a very handsome grass indeed.
Now, is this a perennial or is it herbaceous?
Well, it is a herbaceous perennial,
Yes.
Exactly.
You know what I mean.
Yeah,
It dies down.
It dies down, yes. It will die down in the winter. So again, it's probably one of those that will hold its interest and structure until the end of winter, and then you'll go through and cut it all down quite close to ground level as the new shoots just start to move.
Yeah.
So lovely thing.
Do you know the reference? Blue steel?
No, I don't, to be
I was
honest.
going to say.
Yeah.
Zoolander. You know the film Zoolander?
Yeah, I know of it. I haven't seen it though.
Ah, well, Stephen, that's your homework. So
right.
Zoolander is a comedy about two male models, and when they're doing their model look, the look that he's giving is called blue steel.
Ah, so that's where it comes from.
That's where it comes from.
Yeah.
Oh, well,
Yeah,
I'm glad.
sorry.
I'm glad we cleared that up.
Yeah. Well, I think that's quite good, and it's a good name for the plant anyway.
Well, it's very handsome.
Yeah, and it's very steely-like. It's very rigid and upright. So there you go.
There we go. All right, we are surrounded by grasses here, though. So where are we going to go next?
Oh, well, we'll go that way.
Okay. Well, Stephen, even I recognise this one.
Yes, I have to say this particular grass was probably one of the earlier ones that sort of made itself known to Australian gardeners, I guess.
Yeah.
After pampas grass.
Yes.
Because I can still remember the 1960s where pampas grass
I
was
remember
planted.
my childhood in England in the 70s.
Yeah,
Pampas grass in the middle of every suburban house's front lawn.
yeah. Awful look. But anyhow.
But it was Edwardian, wasn't it? Wasn't it brought into Britain turn of the 19th, 20th century?
It was, and in fact, there's a garden in Melbourne called Ripon Lee that still has pampas grass by their lake there. And when pampas grass first came into Australia, and it's a Edwardian or Victorian house, when pampas grass was first brought into Australia, the first clones we had were actually sterile. But then when it became really popular, people were bringing in more seed from overseas, and of course we ended up with viable clones that would self-seed, and now it's become an issue in lots of areas around Australia. So yes, you certainly don't grow pampas grass anymore. But we can have something, I think, even more elegant than that, and that is this giant grass from the sort of Iberian Peninsula area, and it's still being sold under its old name in most parts of the world, Stipa gigantea.
Yeah.
Fortunately, the new name still includes gigantea, so you've still got the species name, and it's now called Celtica. So Celtica gigantea, and it is one of the most elegant and beautiful evergreen grasses. So it's not one that you cut right down to its socks in the spring.
Yeah.
You go through and rake out the dead flower heads and the dead leaves.
Which we made a video with Michael McCoy in a perennial garden that he'd made and designed, and you showed us how to do that. So we'll link that video.
Yes, and it is a grass well worth growing in any sort of Mediterranean to even colder style garden. Grows well in English gardens. You'll see it often in their perennial borders. Yeah, fabulous grass. Definitely well worth looking out for.
And your point about pampas, bless it, is that it's very rigid and vertical, whereas gigantea moves and it's more open, got a better form, well not better form.
And you don't end up with paper cuts when you go in to clean it out, because pampas grass is quite sharp along the edges, whereas this you can rake through it without suffering blood loss.
Now this isn't a film about pampas grass, but I'm just assuming because it's called pampas grass, is it Argentinian?
Oh yes, yes, that's where it came from. There are a couple of New Zealand species that are similar, with tall fluffy flower heads on them, known as toi, and it was in fact included in the same genus for many years, the Cortadera genus that pampas grass belongs to. I think it's been cut out now into another genus, but anyhow, so yes, the true pampas grass did in fact come from the pampas.
There you go.
So there you go, the name was correct.
Well, talking of New Zealand, Stephen, if we just shuffle slightly this way, ta-da, what's this one?
All right, well this is another New Zealand grass which has proven itself to be quite tame in gardens here, certainly in Australia, and I've seen it in the wild in the mountains of New Zealand, and it's got to be one of my favourite grasses. It's Chionochloa flavicans, and it's known as dwarf toi, and yes, it grows to a little over waist height. It makes a lovely big arching mound, and you get these fabulous arching fluffy seed heads that come out and almost whitey green, and then they go sort of more greenish, and then they get slightly coppery coloured as they go over, and I just love it sort of arching elegance. I think it's a beautiful grass.
It's a generous clump too.
Yes, it does make a good clump. You don't want to plant it somewhere where it'll get in the road of your path, because you don't want to have to hack it back. So allow it the space so that it can sort of flop out elegantly, and it would make a fabulous garden grass.
And it's making a fabulous garden grass in your garden.
Yes, we in one of our videos, I showed you the young ones that I just planted outside my chicken house. And mine's not quite this big, but it's looking more or less the same as this now, so it's got itself going really well. It loves being where it is. It's getting the extra moisture from the chook run and
fertilizer
as well, yes, and it's loving it. So if you're going to grow this grass in a garden, you will need to give it a little bit of irrigating. It does like a bit of moisture.
So other care, obviously it's in full sun, but given it's from New Zealand, what's its hardiness? Could it grow in colder climates? Sorry, is it herbaceous?
No, it's an evergreen grass.
Right.
So again, it's one that you'd rake through every so often just to clean the dead material out. So yes, it's an evergreen grass, and in fact, as far as I know, most Australian and New Zealand grasses are in fact evergreen. We don't have a lot of herbaceous grasses that are native to our part of the world. So most of the herbaceous ones tend to be Northern Hemisphere.
Right.
So there you go.
What do you reckon about cold climates? No?
It would go down to reasonably cold climates, probably not the coldest of Northern Europe and North America, but it's reasonably cold hardy. I mean, it grows up in the mountains in New Zealand, so I think it's got potential in quite a wide range of areas. And I don't find it's one that self-seeds itself, although I don't have too much trouble raising seed. So under nursery conditions, I can raise babies, but I feel reasonably confident that I'm not going to be selling something that's going to take off. And of course, if you're growing it in New Zealand, it's allowed to, because it's in its native habitat.
But I think too, what we've mentioned with lots of different grasses is that there's no one rule about weediness. You've got to really understand your climate, your conditions, and what works for you, and local councils, local authorities, but also garden clubs, people will know, and there'll be also a weed list wherever you are, which will quite bluntly describe what species of what are weeds in your area.
Having said that though, of course, those lists are of proven weediness, so sometimes you don't know that something is going to go
unproven weediness.
Yes, unproven weediness, which is another thing altogether. So something that's not been trialled out in your area may not be a weed for me, but it could be weedy for others. So you do have to consider all of that sort of stuff when you're selecting a new grass.
And actually, Matt made the point about gigantea, that where he is, he's had, what, 2 seedlings in 20 years. A few hundred meters lower elevation down the road, and the gardener has hundreds of seedlings every season.
Yeah, so it can happen. It's also to do with what surface material you're putting down as well. Some grasses will re-sow into gravel, but they won't re-sow into mulch.
Yep.
So, so it depends on what you're using as a surfacing material for your garden beds.
Yeah.
Some grasses will in fact self-seed into disturbed ground. Other grasses won't.
Yeah.
So it does depend on the individual.
There you go. All right, I can spot the grass over there that Matt said was his favourite.
All right, well, let's go and have a look at that one then, shall we?
Well, Stephen, I think this was Matt's favourite grass that you mentioned.
And I sort of get it. It's a beautiful steely blue grass with a very vertical form.
Great colour.
It's about to just come out into flower. It's got some flowers just starting to form in it. And it's one of the North American Andropogons. And this is a selected form of Scopularum, and it's called Prairie Blues. And it's lovely. It's soft. It's not too tall, around about the metre and a bit. And it seems to flourish where it's not watered, not fed, not over mollycoddled in any way, shape or form, and makes a wonderful clump. And it's just starting to show a tiny bit of purplish colour through the foliage as well. And apparently that becomes even more obvious as the plant gets older.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Is this herbaceous?
I think it is semi-herbaceous, this one. It's still got dead foliage from last year in here. So I'm wondering whether it's one they rake through instead of cutting off at ground level.
And I suppose, talking about how to use grasses, obviously we've talked about the varying heights and scales, but there's also colour. Yeah. That if you're doing colour blocking, which of course people do often want to choose colour ways for their borders, then obviously this name has blue in it. You have things that are gold, you've got things that are copper, things that go scarlet in winter. You can get awesome colour.
Yeah. Oh yeah, many of the grasses go lovely colours before they die down. So so they're not sort of homogenous. There's lots going on in the world of grasses, and it's well worth diving in and having a proper look.
Lots going on in the world of grasses, there is. Well, there is a lot going on in this world of grass, and I want to go. So we've seen Matt's favourite grass. What's yours?
I think the Chionochloa. I love that New Zealand toy. I think it's a very elegant and attractive grass, and you don't see it around terribly often. So being the plant snob I am, it's quite nice to have something that not everybody else has in their garden.
Well, the one that I love is over there, so let's go look at that.
All right, that's the next one then.
So Stephen, this is the grass that I'm in love with. Look at that burnished purple.
It is fantastic because you've sort of got grey going to burgundy
and a green and a bright green. There's really 3 different colours.
Yes.
It's the most beautiful grass. So this is one of Matt's own creations.
Well, one of his own selections from seed, and it's one of the Panicum grasses. Yeah. And again, it has allusions to music. This one, heavy metal. So
not a taste we share, but that's okay.
Not necessarily, but that's fine. And I have to say, your taste in grass is quite remarkable because it is a beautiful grass. And if you hadn't selected it as your favourite, I might have. I think it's lovely, and it's just about to start flowering. It's got its flower spikes in there, and the Panicums get this sort of puff of tiny flowers. They sort of look like little midges floating over the top of everything. Yeah. And so when it's in full bloom, it'll be gorgeous, and the purpley colour will become more and more dominant as the plant goes on, and then it will go all sorts of fabulous colours before the whole plant dies down in the autumn.
So this one, very strong colour. Now, what's that? Is it called flame grass? There's a grass that has very, very red.
Yeah, sure. It's another Japanese flame grass.
Japanese flame grass, that's it.
And it's a much smaller herbaceous grass and needs a fair bit of moisture to keep it going well. And it wafts a bit, so it makes a sort of a drift. But I don't think it's got the presence of this one. I think I prefer this one.
Okay. I love it. All right. Well, luckily, we can exit through the gift shop. I did notice there was 3 plants with this, Stephen.
Yes, at least 2 of them might be going home with people, funnily enough.
All right. Now, there's another grass that you loved.
Oh, yes, one that's new to me, which I think we need to go over and have a look at.
Okay, let's go.
All right.
Well, Stephen, why did this one leap out at you? Very fine, feathery thing.
it's just gorgeous. What more can I say? And it's new to me, so it's a plant I hadn't come across before.
Yeah.
And it's known as Stipa itchu, although apparently it's had a name change and it's now Javara itchu.
Yeah.
And it's from Argentina, Mexico, Venezuela, all that sort of central South American area. It's an evergreen grass, and I just love the soft fluffiness of it. It is just gorgeous.
It's really beautiful, and it's got very, very fine grassy leaves.
Yes, funnily enough, it looks like a grass, but yes, it's an evergreen, but very thin, fine-leafed grass. And I think it would make a stunning mass planting or just a dot plant in a border.
Yeah.
You could go either way with it. Matt assures me that they don't have seedlings or have yet to find any seedlings come up of it. He feels fairly confident, at least in his climate, it's not going to be an issue.
Yeah.
And I just think it is just beautiful.
It really is. It doesn't look like it's going to be, you know, like a massive thuggish thing. It's always
Yeah.
going to be quite small and elegant.
Yeah, and so it would fit into even a very tiny garden.
Yeah.
and give some presence. So it could be quite close to a path because it's not going to lean out over a path particularly much. And so anywhere where you want a sort of a vertical accent plant, but something that's soft and airy. And I just think Stipa issue is just beautiful.
It really is. And it's sort of planted in front of this log wall, and it looks absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah, it's the first thing you see when you drive into the car park here. And I have to say it was one of the first things I came to have a look at when I got out of my vehicle.
All right. Now let's go and look at one other type of grass
Yep.
before we exhaust all the grass.
Well, we won't have exhausted anywhere near all of the grass, but we'll at least have given people a bit of a taste for some of the unusual and interesting ones.
Yeah, yeah. All right, off we go. So Stephen, I suppose for me right now, we're in temporary digs, everything's in pots until we move.
Yeah.
I don't have much direct sun, so
Yeah.
it's a problem for me saving all these things that I've been collecting for our garden. But there are grasses for shade.
Well, there certainly are. And of course, many grasses can be pot grown too, so I wouldn't exclude them from being part of the mix.
Exhibit A.
Yes,
Oh.
is this one here. And this is Japanese forest grass, Chionochloa macra. And in the case of this plant, it's a variety called all gold because it's all gold.
Ta-da.
Yes, it was a fairly obvious name, I guess. It does come in a dark green form, and you also get a green and white and yellow stripy form of it. And in fact, in Japan, they select all sorts of different forms.
I think I've got the variegated one from you. I mean,
You could well have
why
done.
would I have bought variegation, especially from you?
Ah.
But I did.
Yeah, well,
So
there you go.
when we're talking about shade, though, you made a film with Alexandra of the Middle-Sized Garden about shade, the shade and the shade and the shade.
Oh yes, there's lots of variations on the theme.
So what sort of shade is this grass going to
All right, well, certainly the golden forms and the golden variegated forms do need some light because if they don't get enough light, the gold tends to fade a bit. So I would say a spot that has very no direct sunlight, but light shade, if that makes sense. So it's got to get plenty of light, but no direct sunlight. And in fact, this Chionochloa has copped the sun. So we can see it's got a few bits of burn on the leaves up here in the top. So it doesn't want the direct sunlight on it, but you can also see where it's been sitting down in amongst other plants where the foliage has lost its gold. You need to give it enough sunlight or enough light to bring the gold up, but not so much as to get it burned. So you've got to find the right spot.
not a dense canopy deciduous tree
Yeah.
would be good, because obviously it's herbaceous, so it's going to die down.
It
So
dies down in the winter, so it doesn't really care terribly much what happens to it during the winter months. It looks pretty as it's dying down, so the foliage often goes quite pretty colours in the autumn before it dies, but it doesn't hold itself up during the winter particularly well. So it's one of those I'd probably prune down reasonably early in the year and then put the pot behind the shed until it starts to shoot again, and then bring it out where you can enjoy it, because it has this sort of miniature bamboo look to it, which I find very appealing, and it's very popular amongst those who do like to have a Japanese-esque style garden, because it is commonly used in Japan. And I think there's even Horticultural societies in Japan. I mean, they take this plant quite seriously, and any new form that shows up will get snapped up at huge expense. So as far as I know in Australia, though, we have the green one, we have this all gold one, and we have the gold variegated one, but I haven't come across any other forms of Horticultural here. So that's Japanese forest grass.
Now, given where it's from, is this going to need more moisture than other grasses we've looked at?
It's not particularly happy getting really dry.
Yeah.
So it's not for the really dry shade, but then it probably doesn't need any more moisture than your average hosta. It doesn't need to be wet, so just kept moist. And if you're in a really hot, dry climate, for the summer, you could actually sit the pot in a saucer of water and make sure that it had adequate water going through the plant.
Well, let's talk a bit more about pot culture. So we've looked at a lot of different grasses.
Yeah.
And I think like, a lot of people don't have the space, so they grow in pots on windowsills, balcony, terraces. But also, there is a bit of a trend for the whole plant pot by the doorway kind of thing. Very sort of Great Dictionary.
Yeah, very, very Christopher Lloyd. Yes.
Very Christopher Lloyd.
Yeah.
And so things like this, for example, make an amazing counterbalance to other structural things. So would it be fair to say most of these grasses that we've looked at could be grown in pots?
Oh, look, most grasses can. I mean, some of the really big ones you'd need to have in quite large pots. I mean, it's just logical. And most of them will need semi-regular dividing because they will exhaust what's in the pot fairly quickly. Most grasses have quite vigorous root systems. So they will need to be fed regularly and they'll need to be divided probably yearly or at least every 2 years, and a smaller one put back, but that always gives you more stock to work with or to give off to friends and things.
To sell in your case.
Yeah, or to sell in my case.
Evil capitalist, or share and swap at plant fairs. Well, I love this gold leaf.
Yes, it's very pretty, the Chionochloa, and one of those is definitely going in my shopping basket before I leave because it's the one colour I haven't got.
Ha-ha.
There you go.
Well, Stephen, what an epic, and here we are by the gift shop, so we can exit by the gift shop. And I did just notice, sorry, it's behind you.
Yes.
Here we are, the grass of my dreams in a pot for sale.
All right.
So we just need to spend some quality time
Yes.
browsing the counters.
I think we do, and in fact I think I might walk off with one of these. I rather fancy this Miscanthus Cabaret, which
we saw that magnificent clump.
Yeah, it's a very handsome Miscanthus, and for those who are indecisive, this one is obviously the one to go for.
Clearly.
Yes,
Anyway,
clearly.
well, there we are. I've loved this grass epic. Thank you so much to Matt and his team for having us here today. It's such a beautiful garden. So remember, if you're in Victoria, you can come and visit the garden. It's well worth seeing.
But closed on Fridays and Saturdays.
And the famous purple pot, basically anywhere in Australia in independent nurseries, you should find antique perennial material. So you will be able to find most of these, well, some of these things in those nurseries. But I reckon if you ask the nursery nearest you to order something for you or to contact Antique Perennials, I'm quite sure you could end up getting something you wanted that way.
Exactly. So yes, push your local nursery to stock their stock. That would be a good idea.
Well, I've loved the grass epic. What could we be doing next week, Stephen?
Oh, goodness only knows. But, you know, there's a world of plants out there. So we'll engage with as many of them as possible.
And if you want to know what we're engaging with in the world of plants next week, you'll have to hit subscribe because we post every week on a Friday.
And don't forget our Monday shorts. So if you've got a question you'd like to ask me, put it in the comments below and we'll get round to answering them on a Monday.
We'll see you next week.
Bye all.